Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. All right, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am here with Ed. And Ed, you just got back from South Africa a few days ago, actually like a week ago at this point. But you had brought something up in one of our staff meetings that I think it would be super valuable for our listeners to kind of hear. And it was valuable for us the other day to just hear that too. So we're going to unpack it today. So Ed, what did you learn?
It was really fun being down in South Africa, and somebody, when they presented this, and it was the 5 stages of a church. It's always amazing to me that when you hear something that resonates so deeply and so strongly with you that it consumes a lot of time and energy, and that's kind of how it is for me. You know, like when I learn something, I'm like, wow, I really got to go deeper in this. And I learned a lot about who I am. And I think that was insightful too. And it was interesting to hear what others had to say. So let's just maybe start. It's the 5 stages of a church. And it's interesting to talk about this because the very first stage of any church is missional. And if you think about every church that has ever existed anywhere in America or around the world, it had to do with somebody who had a missional spirit and said, let's go on mission and to this particular community and this particular place, and let's start a new church. So somebody had this missional spirit, and they went there and to do something that has never been done in that particular place, in that community. Mm-hmm. So I really resonated with that one. So let me just, we'll come back to this one. So let me just list them first.
Yep.
Then after a church is started, and there's usually no structure, no boards, no committees, no anything, they have no constitution. I mean, there's nothing. That the second step is that the church becomes stable. And this is where you start to have routines of we're going to gather for worship on Sunday. This is what our worship is going to look like. Oh, now we need some people to help us. Oh, now we need a way to collect an offering. Oh, now we need to have a bank account. Now we need to start classes for people. So that's the stable church. Then if churches aren't careful, they can slide into a spirit of consumerism. And that's the next step, where then the church starts to become more about, you're here to serve me. I give my offering, you're here to serve me. You kind of know a church gets into that when you hear a lot of, well, it's my church, it's my worship, it's my style, it's everything becomes about me. Then the next stage is preservation, and that usually happens because as the church is going down, they're starting to decline because, of course, you can't cater to everybody's needs. So people are going to leave. Now the church is shrinking. And I think in America, this is what we're really faced with right now, is churches are preserving. They're in a preservation mode. And now they don't want to do anything because they're afraid if they try something or do something, they might have further loss. So now they're just trying to keep everything they have and preserve it. And then the last step is they die. You can only preserve, and a church, when they're preserving, has an expiration date. Because if you're not going to grow and you're not going to be missional and you're not going to reach out, then you have no choice. But as people age out, move away, the last step is the church dies.
So why do you think that this is important for listeners or church leaders to know?
Well, if we look at the Beyond the Breakwater model, this is something that we've been talking about, that there's a gravitational pull to go from beyond the breakwater into the harbor. And then if you're in the harbor, it takes more and more energy to get yourself out of the harbor to become missional. So in the same way, if you look at these 5 steps from missional, to stable, to consumerism, to preservation, to death, there's a pull downward. It's like this gravitational pull. And so I think every church has to really come to grips with this because, one, identify where you are in that process, but then you have to reverse it. And you reverse it by going, up, but you can almost skip all of them and start to go missional, which is actually the answer to all of it. So how does a church go from preservation to missional?
Mm-hmm. So a question in that too is if these are stages, if you're in preservation mode, can you jump from preservation into missional, or do you have to work back up the pipeline from preservation to consumerism to stabilization, missional, right?
Yeah, I don't really think so,
Okay.
Lindsay. I really think it's, as I've thought about this, I think it doesn't matter which stage you're in. If you're in a consumerism place as a church, that everything's become about what everybody wants individually, then the challenge has to be, it's not about us. It's about Christ, and it's about what he wants us to do. Maybe we should do something in the community. And then you have people who are like, well, I didn't sign up for that. I'm not going to do that. I'd rather leave. And so you have people in every stage that whenever a church chooses to become missional, boy, you always have loss. Always, because people are like, I didn't sign up for that. If you're going to be missional and you're going to reach out, I want to leave.
Yeah, that's tough because I feel like there are things that are underlying that, because I think people would look at missional objectively as like, that's great. Like, that's a really nice thing that they're doing. But at the heart of it, it's like, once you start experiencing it, it's like, oh, this is hard. I didn't know it was going to come at the cost of XYZ, which we've had episodes on that in the past too.
Yeah.
Just, people leaving, or people wanting their old church back, of that just being a club mentality. Or
Yeah.
we had both listened to a podcast about like, does the church really want unbelievers in their church? Because it's like, well, I don't know that person. I like knowing every single person in my church body. And so I think the sound of mission is great. Like, I think everybody is on board with that, and they'd be super excited to do it. And I think from a knowledge standpoint of how Jesus did ministry in his time, and how God has always been a God who is ascending God, and has always been on mission to rescue every single person on earth, is like that all makes sense up here. But when we start to experience it, and experience the messiness of things, and not having just like a nice little fluffy Bible study of the same 8 women that meet every single week, but now you have somebody coming in and changing the whole dynamic of your group, it's like, that's hard, and I don't want to be a part of it. I want what was.
Yeah. I think every time we talk about missional, that very first step, it always comes with loss. It's never easy. Every time you say, I think we ought to try something, or let's do something, you're always going to get people who are like, no, I don't want to do that. I actually had that this morning in a meeting, that we're looking at another mission opportunity and something else that the church might be diving into. And one of the persons very strongly was not in favor of it. And immediately it's just like fear of loss. Like what are they going to do? How are they going to respond to this if we move forward anyways? Might we lose this person? I hope we don't lose this person, but that becomes like, oh my goodness, there's a cost to being missional, and it might be a relationship, because somebody's like, I don't want to do it. I don't think we ought to do it. And the others are like, no, I think we ought to do it. So it becomes hard.
So how do you cope when that does happen? Like, say this person leaves, who would, like, say you have leaders leave, say you have staff leave, then what is the response? Do you continue to push for that missional part, or are you at that point just entering into like, let's stabilize then until we get staff back in place, until we get leadership back in place, and then we'll push again and try to be missional?
I think you just identified exactly what happens. Like, oh, if we're going to lose somebody, then maybe we should come down a level and let's be stable. Let's stabilize everything, because we don't want to lose anybody. See, that's the whole problem. That, okay, we don't want to lose anybody, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to try something new. We're going to just keep it stable, keep everybody we have, keep the staff that we have. But you can't stay there. Eventually you slide into consumerism. So you have to go, all right, we have to keep trying and maybe push. But at what cost? At what cost if you push too hard and all of a sudden you have a lot of people that are like, we're not part of the church anymore. We don't want to be part of it. Boy, then you almost have to take a step back and say, are we listening? Is this really what God wants us to do? Is this our egos in the way? Why do we want to do this? What's the benefit? So I think starting with why is going to be really important. But I think churches are wrestling with this every single day. Every opportunity that they have come along, they have to wrestle with us.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you gave the opposing side to that of like maybe this is not where God is leading us. But I think that's often like the first question people ask when the very first loss happens or resistance happens is this must be not where God wants us, and then they pull back.
Yeah.
But I think that question still is a valid thing to ask, because that is the thing that people are constantly wrestling with is, are we healthy? But then I think, what is the definition of healthy? Like, at what point will it be enough that your boat is in like pristine condition to then go beyond the breakwater?
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, if your boat has holes in it and the engine isn't running, it probably isn't best to take it out into the open seas, but that thing needs maintenance. So it's a very, very fine line, what I'm understanding.
It is. And I think I learned a lot. My heart, and I think you know this about me, I'm a missional heart. That's my heart. And I don't know, maybe I knew that, maybe I thought that, but it was actually in South Africa that I had two people say, you're a missionary. That's who you are. That's how you're wired. And I was like, oh, well, in the stages, okay, I get it. So I'm always there. But here's the interesting thing too. I want to say this, how much I love the harbor, because the harbor's the stability. So here, when I was gone for those 3 weeks and came back, the church was doing very well. Why? Because they have the structure, they have the staffing, everybody's doing what they're doing. So it was really good. And I think staff appreciated me gone because they had a little bit of a break from the push for missions. They had a little break to like, ooh, good, he's gone, take a breather, get caught up on everything else that you're doing. Because sure enough, as soon as I got back, I started calling meetings, and here we go. Now I'm pushing again. So we're always pushing and always trying to reach beyond that breakwater. But I do love the harbor, but you can get too comfortable in the harbor. And then when you get too comfortable in the harbor and you don't go out anymore, then you have like, oh, we better entertain people because we don't want to lose anybody. So let's change the way that we're worshiping. Instead of trying to lead people into the presence of God, how do we do a better show? How do we do a better preaching? And how do we wow people? And how do we, and it happens to all of us. Like, what do we have to do to maintain the people that we have? And you actually just help to create a consumerism church.
I find it interesting that in these stages, it goes from missional to stabilized to consumerism. Like, I think that, and then preservation, like that seems like, which of these is not like the others? Like consumerism seems like that line that it's not necessarily like a life stage. The other ones seem like life stages. So I don't know. What do you make of that being within the stages?
It's really interesting you're highlighting that, because I said, I think there's a step missing. I don't know what it is. I'm like, there seems to be something missing from going from stable to consumer. And I wrestled with that as well. And I started asking the people that were presenting it, like there's something missing. I don't know what it is, but there's something missing between stable. I think what it is that when you become stable, you have to be in the harbor to become stable, right? I mean, you can't stabilize when you're out in the high seas beyond the breakwater.
Sure.
There's no stable out there.
Okay.
That's just, you're swimming for your life. I mean, you're trying to just do the ministry. Things are coming at you hard. I mean, we see that in some of our ministries.
Can I voice a thing that, like, okay, but what about you're in a stable boat beyond the breakwater? Like, your boat is stable enough. We've talked about, like, trust the boat.
Yeah. Okay. If you're looking at it from stability from that point, if it's not, wavy out there and you're calm, your boat is stable, but you're really not building the structures for how do we maintain the boat? How do we teach the people? That's not, you don't necessarily do that beyond. Everybody's got a life jacket on. Remember, there's no passengers. There's only workers beyond the breakwater. So you're not really focusing on mission statement, financing. Those are all done in a harbor. Like, do we have the finances to do the mission? So when the church comes back and now is stable and you're focusing on all of these things, And I think this is where complacency, like this is comfortable. This is a place that we run. Look at people are coming to church. Church is good. Everything's great. You start to push missional. You get pushed back. So you just go, okay, let's just stay here for a while. And I don't think people realize it's a drift. It's like that gravitational pull into the harbor. It goes deeper into the harbor. And then you're like, oh, what can we do to even bring more people?
Yeah.
And they're really not looking for unbelievers at that point. I think they're really looking for what can we do so that our church will grow, but it's really transfer growth. So what do we need to do to impress people? We need a better kids ministry. We need a better worship.
Right.
We need a better whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's where it I would say it sneaks up on you.
Yeah. Do you remember Carrie Newhoff's church trends for 2024? He said the very first one was the stable church no longer exists. And so if your stability has been pulled from underneath you, like it's like the strategy people are using is consumerism to get there, but you're already on your way to decline and preservation.
Yeah. So what do you think should go between
Decline? Like stable?
from stable to
Yeah.
it's all declining
Right.
to death. So decline is part of it.
I just think it's interesting that consumerism is in there at all, because I feel like you can have like an incredibly stable church that is a consumerism church. Like they're pushing the attractional model a lot, and they're a thriving church. They have a ton of members and engaged members that are all happy to do, you know, I don't know, donut walls and like stuff like that, where it's like that does exist. So I don't know. I don't understand. I'm still not really understanding how consumerism is on the stages.
I think the shift is in a stable church, which is not a bad thing. I mean, going from missional to now we need the stability, we need classes, we need to do discipleship, we need to have small groups. I mean, that's a good thing for churches to have, right? I think the danger is that we're coming to the church probably to serve in the stable church, which is a good thing. You know, like, why are you going to church? Oh, there's this class I want to be a part of. I want to learn. I want to teach. I want to be in kids ministry. I want to serve. I want to engage. But I think what happens is that it can slowly drift to, what can the church do for me? Like, no, I don't want to do those things. I just want to come to church and let other people do it now. And I think it's a mindset shift from I'm going to serve to I'm going to God. And I think we see that on Sunday morning. I mean, you see that when people come to church, everybody likes to hang out with their friends.
Yeah.
But what about the new person who walked in and they don't have any friends? So when we go to church on Sunday morning, are we going to look for the person who doesn't have any friends? That's a serving church. That would be more like that stable. Or are we going to church because we can't wait to see all of our friends? And, oh, that new person doesn't have anybody, but I'm too busy with my friends. I think that's a church that's sliding into, I'm going because I really want to hang out with my friends. I'm not going to serve anymore.
So the churches that push to be missional or to be serving churches, do you think that has to come from the like senior pastor?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I can really answer that well, because I know my heart is that way. So when people aren't, here's what I would say. Like, if you're a pastor that you're not missional at all, you're really much more of a person for stability and in the harbor, and that's your wheelhouse, then you need to support and encourage the missionaries among you. The ones who are saying, hey, pastor, what do you think about? Oh, that's great. Let's have coffee. Let's talk about that. And they're going to have to get out of their comfort zone, realizing, ooh, this is going to stretch them. And I think that's hard because it's easier to go, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay stable.
Yeah.
And then they slide. So I think for somebody who's not, I think it's really important that they would be like, okay, let's go. You know, Gen Z, I think, is incredible for this. Their wheelhouse is beyond the breakwater. So I think for pastors to go, what do you think we ought to do? What do you want to do? How can I help you? What resources do you need to help them?
So
lead.
really, really practically talk to that pastor, the pastor who is like, my heart is not to be out there. Like, I really want to to grow the church. I want to disciple it. I want to pour into it. And, but I do think it's important. I'm just not that person. Do you raise up a committee of people? Do you just trust there to be several individuals kind of like doing their own thing? How do you move it to be like the whole church is becoming missional if you recognize like that's not me?
I think if I was that pastor, I would probably go before the church and say, does anybody have any ideas about how we might reach into the community and serve the community? And just start meeting with people. And when people say, I have an idea, well, let's sit down, let's talk about it. What's your idea? What do you need? How can the church support you? How can the church help you? I think they're going to have to go out of their comfort zone to do that.
Yeah. But I mean, even at that too, it's like, say they have all of these meetings after this and they announce it in church on Sunday and 10 people come up to them and say like, well, I have an idea. I think even at that point, like that pastor might be like, okay, now what? Like, I still don't want to do any, like, I don't know how to do any of this. I'm really overwhelmed with coordinating these things and where to start out there. Like, is it okay for that pastor to like employ those 10 people and say, okay, you guys all get together, talk, and then rope me in when you're ready for something? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course it's okay. I think there's different ways to do it, but I think it might be better for him to be a part of it or her to be part of it from the get-go. Like, hey, when you meet, count me in.
Okay.
I want to be part of it. I don't know if I can help. I don't know if I can add anything, but I think their presence is going to show support for going beyond the breakwater. But if they design the whole thing and then you just show up at the last minute and say, okay, tell me what your plan is, I think they may feel even more uncomfortable because they haven't been part of the process.
Okay. So switching gears from then, say you're in the preservation stage. What are some signs that you're in the preservation stage? We'll start there. What are signs you're in the preservation stage?
I think for preservation, because I would say the majority of the churches in America are probably in preservation. When we talked weeks ago that the average church size is about 50, they're in preservation. If they lose another 10% or 20% of their population, which is only 8 people, 10 people, I mean, we're not talking a lot of people, they can no longer afford a full-time pastor. And maybe they only have a part-time pastor now. So when you're at 50, every family that leaves, boy, that's a hit on the budget. That's a hit on ministry. It's a very significant loss. I mean, if you have 500 people and you lose a family, that's not a hit. You got 50 and you lose a family, that's a huge hit. So now what it is how do we keep everybody happy? And we don't want to change. No, we haven't done it that way before. We don't want to do it any other way. This is the way we want to do it. So when a new idea comes, we're like, too risky. Because if we do that and somebody's upset and somebody leaves, we just went down a whole family. So I think it's almost an unwillingness to explore anything other than what currently is.
So what would you suggest though? Because it's like that church, I'm imagining, is probably pretty under-resourced. Like, say there is a part-time pastor or just one full-time pastor. They have a board. They have like a couple committees that meet for various things within the church, and there's like 20 people that attend. Like, are you just kind of riding out what your church history is or your church trajectory is looking like? Or would you suggest they make a step that is missional?
Well, why don't we look at Pastor Jim?
Okay.
And we don't have to talk about, his last name, but I mean, we can, because we don't want everybody going out and looking and seeing, but okay, so Pastor Jim came to us. And if you remember, after he did some training with Beyond the Breakwater, and I'll just start this out and then you can kind of fill in the rest of it. He went back to his church that Sunday and he said, I refuse to officiate the death of this church. And that changed everything. So what happened after that?
So then he did announce on that same Sunday, like, if you are interested in serving the community in some way, like, we're gonna do something, we're gonna change. And I think 8 people came up after that, and they formed a team. I think it's called Go Find the One. And so now they've really been killing it. Like Thanksgiving, they served a Thanksgiving meal, and their church attendance is 180.
130.
130, and 350 people came to this meal on Thanksgiving Eve. And I remember we had heard from their staff, and we were like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Like you served over double like what you worship. And like those are people in your community serving because they understand the heart of Jesus and they want people to know him and just care for their physical needs. And now the community actually that they're in, there is a vacant building, and they approached Pastor Jim and said, would you consider taking over this building? And I think we talked about that on the podcast of just like how incredible that a community would, like, their first thought is, let's go to the church and ask if they would take care of this building. Like they trust the church with the welfare of their city. That's pretty cool.
But, so just a few weeks ago before I left for South Africa, I heard from Pastor Jim. And I found this so interesting. It's kind of what we're talking about today, that some of his church members said, Pastor Jim, you might be spending too much time on these things. You need to spend more time at the church doing the things for us. And that's kind of that same spirit. Isn't it interesting that he's like, wow, I really want to sink my teeth. I really want to go. I really want to do these things. But what's the pull? But Pastor, you're going to be away too much. You're going to be so busy doing things in the community that maybe you can't take care of us. So we want you to scale back, and we want you to not do as much because we really need you. You see, that's that tension of missional and preservation, missional and consumerism. Like, no, you need to be here and take care of us for when we need you. And I think pastors feel this tension of, I really want to be missional, but I'm being really brought back.
Yeah. Or in just like the thought too, because I think a lot of people are like, okay, but when we are serving and we are going out there and we are being missional, like we're going to bring people back and we need them to be cared for. And I think that is a very like valid point to have too.
Yeah.
And so there is just that tension, but could their response be to like, Pastor Jim, do you trust us? Can you trust us as this committee to continue doing this and to continue pushing? And you can still be involved and you can still attend meetings and you can still come and serve with us. And we would love your opinion. We've got this. So I don't know. I'm excited for that.
But isn't that great? That's almost like the stable church and the missional church right there. What you just said. Trust us. We've got this, or trust us to do the missional. You take care of the stable so that when they come back in, you care for them, and we'll do the missional part. Or vice versa. Pastor Jim, you do the missional stuff. You keep going on that and trust us so that when they come into our church, we're going to really take care of them.
Yeah.
See, that's a healthy church that's being more missional. And he really took the church from being preservation all the way up to missional.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to listen to what he's doing.
And from my understanding and what we talked about at our staff meeting the other day when you brought in these stages is that it is a constant push to be missional, like constant, because like we've talked about, your natural tendency will be to go into the stable and then just start working down those stages into decline. And so you had kind of shared with staff, like if you're wondering why I am always pushing and always scheduling meetings and always going out there and always chasing after the next thing, is because if we stop, like we are going to be sinking down. Actually, you should share the car analogy on the hill.
Yeah, I think the car really helped. I was trying to think of an analogy for the staff, like how can I explain this to them? And I feel like the Lord just gave me this simple little thing that if you think about a car that's on a hill, and you tie a rope to the car and it's in park, and you take it out of park and you put it in a neutral, and you're holding on for dear life to this car. The gravitational pull is it wants to go naturally down. But imagine if you want to bring it up just one parking space. How much energy does it take to grab that car by the rope and heave-ho and pull with all your might to go one parking space? How much energy did it take to go one parking space versus if I just let go my grip on the car, it'll go one parking space with zero effort. And I think that's where the church doesn't necessarily see that if they're holding on for dear life to keep their church where there is, right where it is, just fatigue causes you to almost like, oh, I'm losing my grip, and it's sliding down. And so the church has to always, always be pulling up. And the other thing that I shared is imagine once that vehicle starts to go downhill, how much more energy does it take to stop the slide and to reverse the slide? So churches, don't wait till you're in preservation mode, because your church is already going downhill, and it's going to take every one of you to hold on to that rope to stop the car from going to death. So I do like the analogy, because it's that same gravitational pull we've talked about, whether it's a car going downhill or whether it's the gravitational pull from beyond the breakwater into the harbor, or the gravitational pull from missional to stable to consumer to preservation to death.
And I think too, if you're like pushing that car up, and the idea that like to be missional, it is a constant push. And to be missional, I don't think it is to get to the top of the hill and leave the car parked up there. It is just constantly you're pulling, or you're pushing. And it's not just like a touch and go thing, or let's just have this meeting once, or we'll do this one thing. But it is a constant effort to not backslide.
Almost the image that when the church comes together on Sunday, everybody push and pull to go up.
Yeah.
That's Sunday morning. But imagine if everybody's consumerism, they all jump in the car.
We're changing our name from Beyond the Breakwater to I don't even know.
But isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
And then if it starts going downhill, now you're just trying to save it because it's about to crash.
So with that uplifting message, what can we leave listeners with?
I think I would pray for every church, for every leader, for every pastor. Give me a missional spirit, or raise up people with missional spirit, so that we can look beyond the breakwater. Not just to preserve the church. See, that's the why. Not just so that we have enough people to stop the downward, the gravitational pull, but to say, if the church is going down, then why don't we use every last effort and energy that we have to reach one more? And I think that's the answer for every church. Go beyond the breakwater, no matter where you are in the process, and try to reach one.
That's great. This is a great conversation, Ed. We will catch everyone next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.